This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host for this week's episode, Paul J. Slee, filling in for the illustrious Mike Rapin, who is currently exploring the far reaches of the Savage Land, also known as New Jersey. But I'm not alone. I'm joined here at the I Read Comic Books podcast headquarters with two patrons of the Double R Diner in Twin Peaks, Washington, Kait Lamphere.
Hello.
And Kara Shamborski.
I love that I understand that reference now.
Yes, I did it for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, fair warning, there might be a lot of Twin Peaks discussion inadvertently betwing Kara and I while we're talking about this episode. We'll try to keep it
spoilers for anyone.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, sorry. Forget I said anything. But I'm so happy to be here with the both of you. That way, anything that goes wrong while Mike's not here, it won't be my fault alone. I have backup to help me out with all this. And also, obviously, to talk about comics. We're going to have a sort of free-form discussion for today's episode, talking about whatever we want, comic books, Twin Peaks, whatever else we can think of, favorite teas to drink while reading comics, all that stuff.
Yes.
But before we get started any further, I have two questions I'm legally mandated to ask both of you. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kait.
I've been good. I am waiting for the day when I can start putting my plants outside instead of them just being shoved behind the couch and waiting for my cat to knock them over. Someday I can grow my own tomatoes again. I'm only a few months away.
Yes.
And then that's all you'll hear about on the podcast is my tomatoes.
Perfect.
I recently read Heartstopper volumes 1 through 3 by Alex Oseman. And Kara, I have to tell you that I paired this comic book with the tea, and it was white tea with cinnamon and pink peppercorns. And I drank this at 11 p.m. and then I didn't sleep because white tea has caffeine.
No.
But this tea was like delightful and soft and comforting, just like this comic book is. And this book began as a webcomic, and then it was published physically, and it did really well. And I actually picked up volume 3 at Meijer, which is like a Midwestern Walmart, but I like it better. But I didn't realize that I was picking up volume 3. I just grabbed this book. I was like, yes, Heartstopper is doing really well. It must be good. And now it's mine. So then I got it home and I was like, oh no, it's volume 3. So I went to my LCS and I picked up volumes 1 and 2. And I was just like, I hope this is good. And it was great. 1010 would buy on a whim again. This book is about two British teen boys falling in love, and one of the boys was outed a year earlier and experienced some like really intense bullying, which the long-term mental health effects of that are being like slowly unraveled through the series. And then the other boy is like just figuring out that he's bi, and he's like trying to figure out how to refer to his sexuality, if that's the term that he wants to use, and like how to come out to people who he wants to come out to. Like, does it matter to make some kind of an announcement, or can he just like start holding hands with his boyfriend? I did notice that in like a lot of LGBT plus stories, the characters are like already out from page 1 and understand themselves. So it's really refreshing to see that there's like this whole process of self-discovery in this book. Also, this is really unique to me because in so many stories, the story ends when the romance starts. Like it's all like the tension of, are they going to date? And then once they start dating, it's over. Well, that's not this book. This book is about their relationship. And like the boys are figuring out how to communicate, how they feel about different things, how they want to interact with people around them. And it's so refreshing to see that difference in this story. And this is like, I don't know, it's a slow burn, but it's a really quick read. Like I read all 3 volumes in a day and a half, and I didn't want to put it down. The art is really unique. It's like, it's 2-color and it's fairly basic. And I don't know, I get the strong sense that the creator must read a lot of manga because the facial expressions are really clear, but it, like, you can tell what they're feeling, but it's through like this simple use of kind of unrealistic line work sometimes. And then if something is might be unclear to the reader, there's like this caption that just says what they were doing, like an arrow pointing to him and like just came out of the bathroom or something like that. And I'm considering that I read a lot of manga. That just works really well for me. I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. Like very clear. Thank you.
It's like, I understand this visual language. Thank you.
Yeah. And so Heartstopper Volume 4 is also out, but I don't have that yet. I have to go to MILCS and pick that one up and read it immediately. And then Volume 5 is coming out sometime this year. It just says 2022 when I look it up. But this is all available online. It's available on Tapas, Webtoon, and Tumblr. And then there's a Netflix adaptation that is going to air in like 2 weeks on February 22nd. So great timing for me.
Yeah. I got to get caught up before the show starts. No, it sounds really interesting.
I'm very excited.
So, yeah,
their casting is really good. I mean, I don't know, like I haven't necessarily seen all these actors act before, but they look like I interpret the characters in my mind. So
gotcha. So it's live action, not an animation,
right? Yeah.
Well, yep, another one to add to my ever-growing to-read list. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
So that sounds great. So what about you, Kara? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I would love to continue talking about adaptations. That was my unofficial mini theme for this week. All right, so the last time I was on the show, I said my upcoming picks were a few Chinese danmei stories, which is like a male-male relationship. And I reserved some books from the library thinking that they were comics because they were published by Seven Seas Entertainment, which does do some comics. They had beautifully illustrated covers. And I was like, this must be a manhua. Like, let's do this. I will try a different comic book. And one of them arrived, and it was, in fact, the English translation of a web novel. So I was like, okay, so I lied to everyone the comic podcast, but let's see how this goes. And I felt so hard for this trash story that I am now like halfway through the first season of the anime, which is available on Netflix in the US. And there is a manhua adaptation that I found. There's like a few of the beginning chapters translated into English. And then I ended up on the Chinese social media site Weibo, and I don't speak any Mandarin, guys. I have no idea what I was looking at, but they had like some of the later chapter images illustrated. So this is like, let me tell you a little bit about the world of Heaven Official's Blessing. So Volume 1, that's the name of this web novel. So it's kind of like if you've read any fan fiction whatsoever, you are familiar with the type of writing style that you tend to see in fan fiction and in some online writing, where maybe the person who's writing doesn't necessarily have an editor, a traditional novel structure, a traditional 3-act structure, no rules whatsoever. So some of this writing tends to be either like scene-based or stream of consciousness, and it's just like the traditional rules of publishing do not apply because it's usually just somebody writing something that they want to write and share with an audience and not really making money off of it. But it appears that this particular creator, Mo Xiangchong Chu, does make money off of this because they have 3 popular danmei series that have been translated and adapted and like all this stuff. So I assume, fingers crossed, she's making money. So
yeah.
The general plot of Heaven Official's Blessing is there's this the closest I can think of like an English equivalent is like this god named Shelian, and he's like a trash god, and I mean that in the most literal sense of the term. He's like, so this is, I am very unfamiliar with Taoist philosophy, the philosophy and religion in China. So a lot of this was like a deep dive culturally for me, because the English translation of this novel by Seven Seas does have a very helpful glossary at the back, where they explain like some of the Mandarin honorifics and diminutives that they use and keep in, which I think does enrich the story. And some of the cultural things that are mentioned that just went way over my head because I am not Chinese and I did not grow up in a Chinese environment. So there's like a lot of historical, cultural, religious references that that are included. So this takes place kind of in like medieval China, and Shelian is a prince who ascended into the heavenly realm 3 times because he got kicked out twice. And one time he was only in heaven for about 30 minutes before everyone was just like, get out of here. So he just has been spending the last 200 years bouncing between heaven and earth, basically. And he ascended for the third time. And your introduction to him is that he's such a disaster that when he ascends, he like causes all of this destruction in the heavenly realm, and like people, like bells are falling on top of people, palaces are springing up where there weren't palaces before, and everyone's like, this fucker again, like get out of here. And the administrator up in heaven is just like, okay, you can fix all of this if you earn like this crazy amount of merits by doing like good works on earth and getting humans to like believe in you and all this. So he goes back down to earth, and he gets wrapped up in like a series of actually really well thought out like adventures with ghosts. And ghost is more like, again, that's like a really rough English translation. It's more like what we would think of as like demons.
Gotcha.
So it's sort of like a little adventure through these like Chinese cultural ghost tropes that I wasn't very familiar with, but are like super creepy. Like there's this one scene towards the beginning where he ends up going through this forest that's just full of corpses dripping blood. So it's like a blood rain coming down because one of the most powerful ghosts just likes to fuck with people this way. It's like so wow. It like there's like these super macabre gross scenes interspersed with Lian being like so weirdly like nonplussed by everything that he's just so chill about everything that happens to him. He's just like, well, you know, this I just have the worst luck, so anything that happens to me, like I know it's just gonna be bad, and that's fine, and it's whatever. Like in the English translation, he literally says the word whatever when confronted with like the weirdest shit. So it's a really nice, it kind of reminded me of Hellboy in a way, because Hellboy is surrounded by all these like mystical gothic like abstract villains, and his solution is to punch them. So Lian's version is like, whatever, this is fine, it'll work out, I'll figure it out. And so he crosses paths with this mysterious guy who shows up kind of like after he's had an encounter with a mystery figure that that everyone is like freaking out because they're like, oh, but he's like the major ghost. But like their first interaction was one where he was like, oh, but he wasn't so bad. He led me through the blood forest and held up a parasol for me, and it was really sweet, actually. And everyone's like, no, he's the bad ghost. He's like, no, it was fine. He was fine. He didn't hurt me. So like right there, you know, like, okay, that's our ship. But then you don't actually see that ghost again for like a while. So it's like a whole like mystery slow burn while he's going on these little quests to save humans from these demons. The novel, I cannot stress this enough, is not well written. It is not
okay.
Well written. Like I was sending Kate some texts of like the pictures of the most random passages where I was just like, who wrote this? So it was fun for me to explore the adaptations, to be like, okay, there are clearly good bones here. Like there's good stuff here. It's been adapted in multiple formats. People really like this shit. Like it's clearly worth exploring. So I'm going to keep reading, even though the writing style it like reads as a little janky for me. So looking at the pages of the manhua that I could find online, which is the comic book adaptation, the art on that is illustrated by I guess this is the person's username. It's Star Ember.
Okay.
Like the style is like these gorgeous manga adjacent watercolors. Like everything is these lovely like pale colors, like not quite pastel, but everything has this lovely like wash over it, so everything feels like it's slightly glowing, which is apt because you're dealing with a lot of characters who are like not on the mortal plane.
Sure.
So just like glancing through that, it didn't feel like perhaps like the best adaptation in my eyes. Like looking at the art, I was like, oh, this art is pretty, but I'm not getting the sense of like movement and energy I would want for this kind of story that does have so much. Like this is lovely as a series of like fan art or like paintings, but to me it's not screaming great comic book story. But
Gotcha.
But let me tell you about the anime because I can't stop watching it.
Okay.
I do think the anime is the best version of this story that I've seen so far. Like I said, in the US, you're able to watch the first season on Netflix. I'm not sure if they have additional seasons coming down the pipe, but just like, because like in the novel and in the manhua, they like start off by giving you kind of like a lot of the backstory of the main character right off the bat, and there's like a lot of like prologue and exposition, and when you're trying to engage a new reader, that's not necessarily the way you're going to do it. But the anime starts right off the bat with like a bride getting murdered by a ghost, so you're right away you're just like, what is happening? And with any kind of like motion media, you have more of an opportunity for like a long lingering glance with music playing in the background that tells you that this is supposed to be a romantic or wistful moment. So I just feel like with this kind of extremely slow burn romance, it like that's a medium that's really working for me.
Gotcha.
So that's my current adaptation obsession, is Heaven Official's Blessing. Definitely. I would say if you're going to check it out, check out the anime.
Okay. Yeah.
I wouldn't expect people to slog through the novel.
I have now added both the comic book and the show to my future plans.
Amazing. I will say that speaking of adaptations, especially when you're going between cultures and languages, I've been thinking about subtitles and translations, because in Mandarin Chinese, there's a lot of kind of like Japanese, like there's these different honorifics that you attach to people's names, or diminutives, like, or nicknames that we don't have a direct correlation with in English. In the novel translation, they tried to do like more of a literal translation, or they just took an anglicized version of the Mandarin word and then had like a glossary note explaining what that was. And in the anime subtitles, they don't do that. So a really big example is like this mysterious guy who shows up to join our trash hero on his quests. He almost immediately in the novel starts referring to Shelian as older brother, which in Mandarin is something close to Gugu. And in the Netflix English subtitles, they don't even attempt to translate that as like, this man is using a term of familial affection with this other man. They just use the character's name. And I'm like, you are removing so many layers of of subtlety, of nuance. Like, how dare you? But, if you're just trying to translate a story and you don't have the time to be like, footnote, in China, in Mandarin Chinese, this word means this. So, like, I get it, but I'm also mad about it.
Sure.
I run into that with K-dramas also, and like the different streaming services will have different attempts at bringing the honorifics in, and but it is like a noticeable thing that is missing from the translation in some way all the time.
No. Huh. I do have one more adaptation to talk about, if you guys will let me continue to monologue for a bit.
Please.
Yeah.
Please. Nothing but time.
You always recommend good things. So.
Oh, I feel that way about you guys too. I want to talk about Kingsman, The Secret Service by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons. So I love the Kingsman movie so much, you guys. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically like James Bond, but make it posh and modern. And it's from the movie came out, I want to say like 10 years ago now, maybe a little less. And it was adapted from this comic book, The Secret Service by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons, which I had never read until now. And I finally sat down and read the adaptation because like I love the first movie. The second movie was okay. I'm sure if I went back and watched it, I would like it, because what's not to like about bringing in people like Channing Tatum as secret agents too, but cowboy versions for the US, the counterpoint to the posh British service. And most recently, again, one of the pandemic delayed films that was supposed to be like a big blockbuster and then just had a quieter release, The Kingsman hit theaters in I think December, and now it's streaming on HBO in the US. That's kind of like the origin story for this non-governmental spy agency that basically is like, we don't think the government can handle this, so we're just going to do it on our own. And by the way, we're all rich aristocrats who have the money to throw at shit like this. So I watched the prequel film, and I would say if you like the franchise, watch it. But if you don't, it's very choppy, and they try to do a lot of like, aristocracy is maybe not the best thing in the world, and maybe we shouldn't go to war all the time, and maybe people should be equal, but at the same time, like, the main character, who's a duke, like, works with his servants and they stay his servants. Like, they're not elevated, like the power structures don't change at all. There's just like a lot of weird stuff where if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you're like, that makes no sense. But that said, the ending was rad as heck. I burst out laughing at the climax, because they do some very funny visual things that, now that I've read the comic adaptation, I see that sense of humor in the comic book. So Kingsman, the first Kingsman film kind of opens with this like James Bond-esque spy saving a doctor, hilariously played by Mark Hamill, from a bad guy in the Swiss Alps in like a chateau. It's super classic Bond. Like, if you're a fan of mid-century James Bond films, as I am, this will feel very familiar. And so I open up the comic book, and the beginning of the comic starts out kind of the same, except it's actual Mark Hamill as the person who's been kidnapped. So I thought that was a great touch to like have him just play a different character. It was like, I can't believe you got Mark Hamill, except I totally can. but you know, in the comic book, Mark Hamill and his rescuer almost immediately die, which is not what happens in the movie, because they like plunge off of this snowy mountaintop, and the spy character is like, it's okay, I've got a parachute, it'll be fine. And so he reaches out and you're watching this scene from the bad guys' perspective, who are still on the edge of the cliff. So you're watching this snowmobile just keep plummeting down, and it crashes. And then the parachute, which has a Union Jack all over it, deploys. And one of the bad guys just says, "Don't laugh." So like, this is the kind of sense of humor that we're working with, that they do employ sometimes in the films. Reading the comic in general, I was kind of surprised by how mediocre it was, like, for lack of a better term. This is like the movies are so stylized and so wrapped up in this like posh British aesthetic and like tropes that we know from like 60s spy stuff, like James Bond and the Avengers series from TV at that time. Everything's very like slick, and you know, there's all these like training montages for the spies, and you get that interstitch with like the bad guy and his plans and all that and what's going on. And so it's just like this nice building of dramatic tension, a very clear aesthetic. Like, it feels comic booky, but in a good way. So I was kind of expecting all of this to be in the original source material. And the original source material, the Secret Service comic book, I kind of felt like I was an archaeologist, not shoveling stuff, but like at the point where I'm brushing a fossil with my tiny little paintbrush, because the pieces are so tiny. And I'm like, how did a Hollywood studio look at this comic book and say, this is the next blockbuster? Because there's so few pieces that are actually here to work with. So it was interesting to read, because like, again, being a fan of the movies, I could say like, okay, what worked better in the film? Is there anything that's working better in the comic? Is this a good comic? And I was kind of like, this comic is okay. Like, I'm not, it's not super compelling. Like, I'm so glad they made all these changes in the film that make it a way more cohesive work. Like, there's a lot of like the whole gentleman aesthetic, for example, which is like the aesthetic and spiritual keystone of the Kingsman films, is like barely mentioned in issue 5 out of 6 in the comic book. And I'm like, thank God somebody looked at that and said, that's the interesting part.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I don't think I've read a Mark Millar comic that I thought was better than okay. So I guess it doesn't surprise me. But and that's also the main reason I've never seen any of those movies, because his name is attached to the source material. But you're making a strong case for me to at least try the movies, Kara. So
I really do love the first Kingsman film. And again, it's like, if you like it, definitely watch the prequel, because they do some stuff there. I will say my favorite part of the comic, the original comic, is that the bad guy is basically like a Mark Zuckerberg type that is dialed up to 11, because he's like basically wants to reset the planet so that the environment can come back or whatever. So it's like similar to the plot of the film, but in the film they're kidnapping / encouraging foreign like dignitaries and powerful world leaders to like join in this endeavor. But in the comic book, this rich dude is just kidnapping TV and movie stars from his favorite nerdy franchises.
Okay.
So he's like, they're instead of talking about like the evil plan, the bad guys are just constantly talking about, did you get the original Star Trek cast yet? How about Red Dwarf? I've got all the doctors. Wow. And it's like, oh my God. So that as a comic book, I was like, you understand your audience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, little fan service there, perhaps. So
I did enjoy the fact that Mark Millar went out of his way to write the words like William Shatner's cool with it. Like, it's like, let's just murder all these people, and all of these TV stars think we're nuts, but William Shatner is just viewing it as more of an intellectual exercise. And I was like, he would. I believe this.
That's not surprising.
Huh. Anyway, so this has been Comic Book Adaptations with Kara.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so like I said, I have avoided those movies, but you've made a strong case for me to at least check them out, or at least not be as suspicious of them. So we'll see. Maybe one day I'll watch them.
That's all I can do, Paul.
Well, thank you, Kara. I just have to get over my weird aversion to anything even remotely related to James Bond. I just find the character in that franchise so boring that anything even remotely close to, even if it's making fun of it, is kind of like radioactive to me. But we'll see. Maybe I'll mature in my my taste as I get older. As for me, I did a lot of reading of comics. We had a very March, early April weather here in Michigan, which means it's wanted to be spring, but also snowed randomly one afternoon. So a lot of opportunity just to stay inside, read comics.
Yeah.
Noted Midwesterner Prince was right when he said sometimes it snows in April. You know, that's a true fact. So I did read some comics while I was stuck inside. I did manage to read all of JLA Avengers. This is the 2004 blockbuster crossover miniseries written by Kurt Busiek with art by George Perez, colors by Tom Smith. It was been out of print for a long time and was recently rushed back into print by the Hero Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization that raises money for comic creators who have legal or health financial issues. And because of George Perez's diagnosis of terminal cancer last year, they kind of put this back into print to raise some money for the organization and as a nice gesture of thank you to Perez for his years of hard work in the comic industry. So I was lucky enough to grab a copy of this. They only printed like 7,000 copies of it for various reasons, but I'd never read it. So I'm glad I finally got my hands on a reprint. And it's basically what it says it's advertised. You know, it's the JLA, the Justice League of America, teaming up and fighting against the Avengers. There's lots of cosmic superhero mumbo jumbo. You know, Metron shows up, Uatu's there, Galactus, all these big characters. And, you know, I could summarize the plot, but really the main appeal is to see George Perez drawing like 200 characters on a double page spread, right? When you get to the page where you finally see Superman holding Captain America's shield and Thor's hammer ready to fight, that's what you paid money for. And George Perez nails it. Obviously, it's a beautiful looking comic. I'm so glad I was able to get a chance to read it. And hopefully they're able to get it back into print for more fans to pick up. It's a really lovely tribute to George Perez and his artwork. So I had a lot of fun reading it. Very, very late 90s, early 2000s superhero comic book style, but I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff sometimes. So
I've heard of the Hero Initiative, but I didn't know that that's what it was. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think Perez, they initially wanted to do this as a tribute to George Perez, and he said, and all the money they make from it, they could keep. He doesn't need the money. He wanted to make a big donation. He was one of the first creators to jump on board with them as an organization, so it's really touching. There was one of the reasons they were only able to print so many copies is they had to make sure they could get it finished, printed in shops while George was still with us, which is kind of sad to think about. But there's a lovely picture someone posted on social media of George actually looking at the finalized cover for the reprint, and it's really touching. He has a big smile on his face. He's clearly moved by the gesture. And again, if you're not familiar, George Perez he's up there with Kirby and Neil Adams in terms of influence on superhero comic book artwork. He's an absolute icon and a legend. So anytime you get to read some of his stuff, especially a big crossover event like this, it's a ton of fun. So I really enjoyed reading that.
He basically was DC Comics in the 80s. Like, he did Wonder Woman, he did Teen Titans. Like, if you've read a DC comic from that time, you probably drew it.
Yeah, and like he worked for Marvel too. He drew the first Infinity Gauntlet miniseries. So that Avengers movie that made $1 billion, like a lot of that was taken from George Perez's artwork on that miniseries. So I mean, you cannot overstate his influence on pop culture in general. So always great to see his stuff. And it's a really fun story too. I mean, like I said, you get the classic superheroes meeting up. They don't trust each other, so they fight. Then they realize they have to work together. Classic stuff. Very, very fun. I also read Batman number 121. This is about a month old at this point, but I'm very slowly making my way through my big stack of comics that I've picked up over the past few months. So I finally got a chance to read this one. It's the last issue of the Abyss storyline by Joshua Williams writing, Jorge Molina and Mikel Janin on art, colors by Timo Moret, and letters by Clayton Coles. I really like this crossover, or this little mini story arc here, where Batman has to go overseas and to investigate a murder mystery. There's a new character called Abyss who was found murdered, and guess who the suspects are, Kara? The members of Batman Incorporated, our old friends, El Gaucho, Dark Ranger, Man of Bats. They're all there. They have a mysterious new benefactor who's funding Batman Incorporated, since Batman kind of forgot about them. And it turns out they're being funded by Lex Luthor. So Batman has to decide if he wants to team up with Lex or he's suspicious. It's a really, really fun sort of Neo Silver Age type story. It's great to see those characters again, because I recently reread the Black Glove story from Grant Morrison and J.H. Williams III, where we see the sort of Batman of all nations, the Club of Heroes show up. So get to see all these characters again was really fun. And I really, really liked the sort of conclusion to this story, where we get another classic Silver Age throwback. The epilogue to the story, we see that there is a new secret society of supervillains being put together, being led by Deathstroke. So clearly Joshua Williams loves Silver Age DC, loves Silver Age Batman, and they're really leaning into this whole stuff. So, and in addition to that, I got to say, Jorge Molina's artwork is just lovely, just lovely. Very sort of painterly type of approach to the inks and some of the color work. It's a really beautiful looking comic. So it's nice to know that Batman comics are still good. Every once in a while, I kind of get burned out on Batman, but man, this was a great story. I'm excited to see what Josh Williams has next in store for that character.
I'm just laughing because I don't normally read Batman comics, because I'm always just like, but he never changes. It's always the same. But that's a very cynical take on it, because of course, when you have the same character for 80 plus years, there's going to be mediocrity and repetition.
Of course. Yeah. There's only so many things you can do with this character, or is there? I guess that's always the debate.
We'll just keep recycling the Silver Age, because that's where all the fun stuff was.
Yeah, apparently. And you're going to get suckers like me who just love that stuff. We're always going to be excited to see El Gaucho show up in a Batman comic. So yeah, that's what we read this past week. And we've got new comics dropping this week on April 13th. I'm curious what you guys are excited for. Kate, what do you have on top of your pile this week?
I have a nonfiction book called Hakim's Odyssey by Fabien Toulme. And actually, Volume 2 releases this week, but this is the first time I'm hearing about the series, so I need to go back and read Volume 1. And I don't know a lot about this, but it's the story of Syrian refugees. And volume 1 seems to be the journey from Syria to Turkey. And then volume 2 is Turkey to Greece.
Okay.
The art style seems a little bit more cartoony than I normally go for, kind of more like a newsprint comic maybe, but this is really a story that I want to read. And I really do take to like nonfiction in comics, even though I can't really pay attention to nonfiction in prose. But I feel like this is an important story to tell because especially with the current events happening in Ukraine that are like overtaking all of our timelines, it's hard to remember that there are other humanitarian crises happening in the world. So I feel like I don't know, this is an important book to put out right now.
For sure. Yeah. I haven't heard of this. It sounds interesting.
There was an editorial in the New York Times this week that I see where they were going, but the headline was definitely like just an attention grab because the picture that goes along with this editorial is of Kim Kardashian and Pete Davidson. The lead of this opinion piece was basically, "Dear Kim Kardashian, please don't elope. We have too much to think about, and you're like pushing out the space in our brains." Because apparently the nebulous they have done research that we can only really pay attention to like 3 or 4 things happening in the world at a time. So whenever the news cycle goes into some new atrocity, we like forget about the previous thing that's supposed to hold on to our attention. So, like Kait was just saying, there's all this horrible stuff happening in Ukraine, but like horrible stuff is also happening in other places. And we just don't have the mental space to think about and be concerned about it all the time. So it's like, how do you kind of remember that there's not just this one thing happening at this moment?
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like books like this are important to like keep putting out, even if it's, last year's news kind of. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm just waiting for give me the comic adaptation of Kim Kardashian and Pete Davidson so I can focus on that. Right. That's
okay. There was a Kim Kardashian comic though that came out 10 years ago, and it's so bad.
What? I'm shocked. I am shocked. Okay.
Well, it was one of those. I'm blanking on the publisher. That publisher that was just putting out all of those really bad like celebrity biography comics.
Right.
Like they had everybody from like Paula Deen, which was my favorite cover because she's just like rising out of a tub of butter on it. It's just...
Oh my gosh.
Sure.
So this publisher did a Kim Kardashian comic, and I was just like, of course I read it, and I was like all of your work, this is trash. Start paying actual creators to make actual good stuff, and maybe we'll buy it.
Yes. Yeah. So anyone listening who wants to make a good Kim Kardashian adaptation comic, here's your chance. You have an audience built in right here. Yeah, exactly. So
I wanted to talk about one more series.
Sure.
Yes.
This is a manga series called Happy Cafe, and it's by Ku Matsuzuki. And this is actually an out of print series, but I have this whole story about how I got my hands on it recently. But first, this Happy Cafe is a slice of life manga about this girl who gets a job at a bakery. And it's a little like cliche. She's small and energetic and outgoing, and then she has a crush on the baker who is tall and brooding and has a secret soft side.
Yes.
But then the third coworker at the shop randomly falls asleep, and he has to be woken up by people just kind of stuffing food in his mouth, which is explained by childhood trauma of being lonely. I don't know.
Oh
anyway.
No, so, you hit all my tropes already with he's energetic and he's broody with a heart of gold.
Yeah, it is like just a fun low stakes read. And I got my hands on volume 1 at my library, and then I was able to request through volume 3 with the Michigan Interlibrary Loan System. And around 1:00 in the morning, sometime last week, I decided that I had to own as much of the series as I could find. And I managed to find volumes 1 through 8 for like a reasonable price on a used home goods website called Mercari that I found specifically because I was looking for this book. And it arrived in the mail just a few days ago, and they're all like new, which is wonderful, except volume 5, which I guess was hard to get a hold of for that original person. And the used copy came from my local library, but my order was shipped from Florida. So just like small world. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It was destined to be in your hands, Kate. That's all I can think of.
Perfect. And if only my library had just kept this series instead of selling it, I wouldn't have to have bought it. But here I am. Right. Anyway, I read this originally because I rewatched a K-drama a couple months back called First Shop of Coffee Prince, where the plot is kind of similar, where a girl works at a cafe with a bunch of guys and she falls for her boss. And like the manga doesn't have the same depth of the plot, but it does have the similar dynamic, and it fulfills my need for something similar, because I can only rewatch this K-drama so often, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, you'd be surprised how many times you could rewatch things that you like, but yeah, sometimes you need to.
I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to say it. Yeah, I'm in the middle of another Twin Peaks rewatch, so yeah, there's no times you can rewatch something. All right, Kara, what about you? What are you excited for? What is on the top of your pile this week?
So the top of my pile is, first of all, shout out to Mike for sending our group chat a book talk of recommendations of graphic novels to read, because it featured a book called Squad by Maggie Tokuda-Hall, and the pitch was basically, it's a teen girl friendship drama situation, but they're werewolves. And I was like, add to cart. Get it from my library immediately. I don't need to know anything else. I'm here for it.
Enough said.
Remix the girl gang. Let's do it. So that I will be reading. And then I guess a little more complex, but I am very curious to read Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight run. I have been hearing great things about it, and I really liked the Moon Knight run that Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey did a few years ago, but now allegedly Warren Ellis is garbage. So I would like to find an interpretation of the character that I don't have to associate with a man who allegedly was really shitty to women. So with the Moon Knight series out on Disney Plus, I would like to dig in a little bit to different versions of the character in keeping with my unofficial adaptations theme. So I figure Lemire's run is a good contemporary place to start.
Gotcha. Yeah. I have to say, after watching the first 2 episodes of that adaptation, I'm hesitant to start reading Moon Knight. I want to learn more about this character, but again, where to start? That sounds like Jeff Lemire's one might be the place to go. I know a lot of people rave about that one. So
agreed. Yeah, I need to read a little bit more about the character myself, because I am watching the show and it's pretty good.
Yeah, and I enjoy it quite a bit. He's basically Marvel's Batman, so of course I'm going to like it.
Right? Yeah. It does have that feeling to it.
Yeah,
it's like from what I understand, it's like they put Batman and Dr. Fate in a blender and slapped a Marvel logo on it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
there you go. Yeah, well, that's enough for me. Very quickly, I want to mention we have some people tuning in to listen to us live. They have some picks for this week. Our friend Danny is going to be reading The Sandman Universe, Nightmare Country #1. And then our buddy Vincent has picked The Batman's Grave. That's a Batman comic I have not read, surprisingly. So we have to pick that up as well. My pick for this week, the top of my pile, is obviously The Ghost in You, the new Reckless book from Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. For those of you who are not keeping score, Brubaker and Phillips have basically switched from doing monthly comics to doing these hardcover standalone graphic novels. And they've been focusing on this character named Ethan Reckless, who's basically, I don't know how to put it, a part private eye, part hired muscle. Anyone that's got a problem that they can't go to the police with, they can hire him to do their job for them. So it's this gritty, hard-boiled crime type stuff that Brubaker and Phillips are perfect at. This newest volume, The Ghost in You, is set in 1989, and Ethan Reckless is out of town, so his assistant Anna is following up on a case that leads her to a mansion where one of Hollywood's most infamous murders took place. I have to assume that's the Tate LaBianca murders, right? If you're going to be talking about murders in Hollywood in a mansion, you're probably talking about the Manson murders, but we'll see. Maybe they could surprise me. I love these books so much. They're right in my wheelhouse. I love these sort of pulpy, crime novels that Brubaker is clearly being influenced by. So, and again, Sean Phillips' artwork is always lovely, and these two guys they work together so well. Every one of these books has been great. So this is the fourth one they've been doing in this Reckless series. Of course, I'm going to buy it right away and be right on top of my pile.
I feel like everything that we've been talking about on this episode, I just keep doing like little mental checklists of what I know about both of your comic book reading preferences. Like everything Kait has been talking about, I'm like little check mark. Things Kait likes with Paul. I'm just like, is it pulpy? Is it Silver Age? Is it like, just like ticking all these little boxes.
We clearly all have our preferred aesthetic, and I think we're very much on brand for this episode, so that makes sense.
I feel like I checked my own boxes for this episode, like nonfiction comics, LGBT, YA, manga, little taste of everything.
Perfect. So should we take a short little break, and then we come back, we can kind of continue this conversation. We have no topic today. We're flying without a net, much like the Flying Graysons, unfortunately. Hopefully we end in a happier note than they did. So we'll be right back after a short break. I'm sorry. It was right there, Kara. I had to do it. Welcome back. Just want to give everyone a quick reminder that we do have another Discord hangout coming up very soon. That's going to be on April 23rd. That'll be at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So if you are curious in hanging out and chatting with us, be sure to set a reminder, mark it on your calendar. We'll all be here hanging out. We're already running pretty long. I know the clock on the wall over here is telling me that we got to wrap it up shortly, but I have a few things maybe to kind of talk about briefly before we put this one to bed. Kait, you were mentioning one of your picks for this week was a nonfiction comic about the refugee crisis. Have you read Rolling Blackouts by Sarah Glidden?
No. Is it a similar topic?
Yeah. It came out in 2016, and it's a nonfiction book, and it's specifically about the refugee crisis following the invasion of Iraq, and it focuses on Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And what's interesting about the book is that Glidden is a cartoonist, and it's her going to these places with her friends that work for a nonprofit news organization. So a lot of it is about, them talking about what caused this crisis, the fallout of the invasion of Iraq, but specifically how a news organization can, or whether they're able to objectively talk about these topics. What is the nature of journalism? So it's a really complex book, but it's like very simply illustrated. It's very straightforward. It was one of my favorite books that came out back in 2016. It seems right in that wheelhouse of what you were talking about with that other book.
Yeah, I just looked this up in my Goodreads, and I do have it on my to-read list, but I'm glad that you reminded me about it so I can actually request it.
Perfect. Yeah. Like you were saying, I really find it somewhat easier to read nonfiction comics sometimes, just because it's, a little bit more straightforward. I think a better way of explaining things. And again, I think portraying information, specifically very complex information, in both a written and visual aspect is almost better than just reading a news story or trying to read something nonfiction in general. So I'm always kind of looking out for complex, difficult topics in nonfiction comics like that.
Yeah, I read some nonfiction pretty recently, and I kind of had a similar thought. Like, I have a hard time keeping my mind focused on the content in a nonfiction prose book. Sometimes they do a really good job of making it a narrative, and then sometimes it's just kind of like listing events. And it's difficult for me to keep paying attention when it's hard to have that movie in your mind while you're reading, So So with comics, it's like they're providing the artwork for you, so it's just an extra way to keep your attention.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a quicker read too. I find a lot more engaging to stick with it, and finish the book that way. So, yeah. Interesting.
Kara, I had a question for you to change the subject.
That's fine. Yeah.
We did that Saga of Saga series together on Patreon, and I was wondering if you're actually keeping up with the issues of Saga as they're coming out right now.
There's more Saga. No, I'm kidding. No. since we went through that experience of reading issues 1 through 50 and issue by issue, and then talking about the different chapters as an arc as opposed to the individual chapters, I learned that Saga for me is a story that works much better if you're reading it in chunks, because with a month plus between chapters, it's really easy for me to kind of forget what happened before, and have I seen this character before, and what do I do with this new piece of information? So I am now going to be a trade waiter for Saga.
I've been following it on Hoopla, but I agree. I think that I'm going to end up rereading it with the trade once it all comes out.
Also, the issue 50 ending, bad thing that happened, I hated it so much. So much that I will probably continue reading Saga at some point, but it is not high on my priority list because I'm just so mad at what happened that I'm like not quite ready to go back there yet, especially when there's so many other things that I also want to read. Like, for example, I'm staring at my embarrassingly overstocked library that's just full of comics that I keep getting and not reading. Like, I think at least a year ago, if not 2, Mike and a bunch of other people on the show were talking about how good the comic book Tetris is. All right. Yeah, I bought that shit. Yeah. It's still on the top of my bookcase, like has not been even looked at in like 6 months, and I just saw it and I'm like, God damn it. So if we're talking about like Saga and these other things I want to read, like Saga's gorgeous. It's a very well done story. The more they write, the more like rough patches there are in terms of content. And I know there have been many points when people dropped out. I don't know. I just feel like Saga is kind of like the Game of Thrones TV series, where it's like you watch it or you very quickly get turned off by it. And I feel like in Game of Thrones, there were a lot of points where people were just like, fuck this. And I feel like Saga is the same. You're like, I understand that this is beautiful and intricate and parts of it are very good, but parts of it are also very bad.
Yeah.
Not right now.
I also grabbed Tetris, but I grabbed it at C2E2 in early March of 2020 before the pandemic shut down the country, and I haven't read it yet, so I understand.
Kate, maybe you and I should just do Tetris book club and be like, anyways, we're very late to this bandwagon, but we're here now.
Yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts on that book, because that's one of those books that I absolutely loved. I was already a big fan of Box Brown when that book came out, and it's even better than I expected. And that's, again, I know Mike has sung the praise of that book on this podcast many times, but even if you're not into nonfiction comics, I think it's such a well done story, and it's so engaging and raises questions about the nature of games itself. It's a great book, a truly, truly great book. So
see, higher on the priority list than Saga.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I tapped out on Saga in the mid 30s. I don't even know what it was that made me stop wanting to read it specifically, but I was just like, I think I'm done with this, and I have yet to go back to continue it. So I don't know, maybe one day. I think maybe it would be reading it in trade versus reading it in single issues would be the big difference to make it more appealing.
Deciding that you're done with something is just a very complicated concept for me. I'm one of those people who has always been like, no, I started reading it, so I'm going to finish reading it. But I found in the last few years in particular, I've been more likely to be like, I am not going to read this entire thing. This is not for me. This is not a use of my time that I want to continue with.
I have that all the time when I'm going through previews each month, where there's titles I've been reading for a long time or newer titles that I jumped on and have been enjoying. But at a certain time, it's like, I only have so much money in my bank account, and I only have so much time to read comics. So it really becomes down to, do I really want to keep reading this, or can I wait for the trade? There are things I'm always going to be reading. I'm always going to be buying Batman, probably, and reading it. But all the tertiary Batman family titles, like, do I need to pull all these right now? So I feel like that's a part of growing up. As Blink-182 once said, I guess this is growing up as a comic fan, is learning when to tap out.
You and I are different people, Paul. I would drop Batman in a hot second and keep going with the tertiary Bat titles. They're way more interesting to me. Well, because Batman, ultimately, he's got to stay the same. So, at the end of the day, he's going to come back to being a weirdo billionaire who hangs out in a cave. But
yeah. I mean, and rereading again. You and I have been rereading a lot of Batman comics lately, specifically written by Grant Morrison, and I was kind of like reading that stuff, and maybe it is kind of the similar thing where you revisit something that you think or that you enjoyed, but you somehow like have a new angle on it when you go back to it, and you like it even more. And whenever I go like read Batman comics or even reread Batman comics, I just realize that so much of the appeal of the character is just inherently aesthetic. The bat suit looks cool. Him punching people looks cool. The Batmobile looks cool. And sometimes that's all I want from a comic book is that it looks cool. And Batman's always going to do that for me, no matter who's drawing it, really.
Isn't that also your argument for Star Wars, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. I could make the same argument for why I rewatch Twin Peaks like once a year. It's like because I like looking at it. You know what I mean? So there you go.
Which
that's a little insight into my taste.
Well, I mean, we're talking about visual mediums, so I should hope that the aesthetics have something to do with your appreciation for it.
For sure. I mean, and again, this is a can of worms that maybe I shouldn't be opening right now, but I just remember sitting in the theater watching the Batman, this newest Batman movie, and there's moments of that movie where I was like, you know what? No Batman movie's ever gotten it right, but there are moments of that movie where just aesthetically, just the way it looks, like they finally did it. This is what I want to see on a movie screen when I'm watching a Batman movie. So, yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
We'll have to save. No. I know we'll have to save the discussion for when it's after it starts streaming.
Well, yeah. I was just kind of looking at it, and I was like, 3 hours. 3 hours. I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom at some point. I just gotta wait till it comes out when I'm at home. I just want to sit on my couch and have all my snacks.
Yeah, this is a take a break in the middle movie.
Yeah,
and that was a giant red flag for me before I went to go see in the theater. I'm not a fan of movies that are usually that long, but I think they make the most use of that 3 hours. It really does fly by once you're engaged. So,
I totally believe that. I'm just like, man, it's going to be out on HBO next month. I'll just wait.
Exactly. The bathroom breaks are easier to do if you can pause it. So
I actually hadn't heard when it was going to hit streaming, so that's great to know.
It's actually at this point, I think it's coming out like next week. Like it's real soon.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't have to wait a whole month. I mean, like,
yeah,
I'm
sure we'll have to reconvene at some point to share our thoughts. We can all scream about how great it was here on the podcast. I know that's what the fans want to hear. So
all I know about it is that Tia dug up an amazing t-shirt for sale online somewhere where it's a picture of Robert Pattinson and it says Batman, but in the Twilight font. I have never been more delighted by a piece of merchandise related to Batman.
It was so bizarre. Remember, so I saw it like a preview showing of it in the theater and everyone's there and all excited. And then I went to go see it about a week later. And I sat down in my chair in the theater and the guy next to me, he's trying to make small talk, but of course he's a guy my age. So he's like, oh, I'm very curious to see what Robert Pattinson is like as Batman. And I just turned to him and I said, he's great. I've already seen it and he's perfect. So I don't understand people's hang up about Robert Pattinson. The dude was a vampire, a guy that hangs out in the dark and broods and can't go in the sunlight. That sounds like Batman to me. So he's training for it the whole time.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for getting it, Paul.
And as someone who has no knowledge of Twilight other than who's in it. So so that's my endorsement. So thank you for letting me mention Twin Peaks and Batman on this. Mike's not here, so we can talk about all of our favorite stuff. Right.
We're just continuing to go down your little checklist, Paul. You even made a wrestling reference by saying tap out.
I know. I almost went there. Thank you for pointing that out.
We're gonna have a busy TV weekend next week because we've got Batman on Tuesday and then we've got Heartstopper on Friday, and I'm gonna go from Batman to a totally different genre 2 days later.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
We'll have to do a follow-up on the adaptation topic and just be like, so Kate, have your eyeballs burnt out yet? How you doing over there, buddy?
Yeah.
Yes, so the spin-off podcast, We Watch Comic Adaptations, is going to be coming very soon. Well, I guess we do that with the movie club a little bit, but this will be even deeper.
Right.
That one. Yeah. Well, yeah, we've been chatting for a while. It's always fun, but we only have so much tape, and Zander only has so much time to edit all this, so we should probably wrap it up. Start playing the Academy Awards walk-off music, please, Zander, while we wrap up here. So, again, thank you both for taking time to talk to us today. It's always fun. Next week, Mike is going to be back, and he'll be back with a vengeance. Brian and Nick will be here to keep him from exploding into 1,000 suns, or not. Maybe they're going to blow up the podcast. We'll see. You can follow us all on Twitter. Kate is at Kate L. Fear, right?
Yep.
That's right. And Kara is at Kara S. Zam. I'm on there at Oh Hi Polly. The podcast is at IRCB Podcast. You can also find us on Twitter. They're obviously Instagram and TikTok, where Renee is doing some amazing stuff on TikTok. I feel too old to be on TikTok, but I do follow us on there, and it's really fun. So, yeah, you can check us out on all those social media platforms there.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga, and more. You can find that at patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcast, Spotify. Yes, they do have ratings, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because we deserve it, you guys. Thank you.
Join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. Check the link in our Discord in the show notes. And also, thank you for everybody who listened this week.
Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth. So why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about I Read Comic Books?
Infinity Shred is the best band in the known universe, and they do all the music for our shows. Zander is a very cool guy who edits the show. He's the best. Thank you, Kate and Kara, for joining us. Thank you, everybody hanging out in the Discord. Thank you for listening to the show every week. We really do appreciate it. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.